Joining us today, I'm Susan Blumenfeld, Director of Training and Technical Assistance for the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health. We're delighted to have you join us for this webinar series on opioids, trauma, and domestic violence, co-sponsored by our center and the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some technical details of the WebEx software that we'll be using today for our webinar. Many of these details are explained on the Using This Webinar tab in the center of your screen. You can see it now. You can switch to this screen from the slides by clicking the down arrow next to Using This Webinar. Please be aware that your screen might look a little different depending on whether you're using a Mac or a PC. On the right side of the screen, there are multiple boxes. Third from the bottom is the chat feature. You may have to click on the chat cloud icon at the bottom center of your screen to open your chat box. This feature will allow you to provide feedback and share resources with your fellow colleagues, as well as to get in contact with the trainers or myself if you have questions regarding the training content. You may contact Angelica Medina, also with the center, if you have questions troubleshooting the WebEx software. To do this, click the down-facing arrow and select the person you would like to contact. You'll see a lot of options. But for this session, you'll want to select all participants. If you would like to respond to a question from the trainer or to contact center staff anytime during the session, you should click on Angelica Medina to privately contact her if you are in need of troubleshooting the WebEx software. So let's check this chat feature. Will everybody please go to the chat box, click on all participants, and then type in where you're calling from, and then press enter. Great, thank you. While people can get a lot out of the chat feature, there are times when it moves really quickly and can feel distracting. If this is true for you, feel free to minimize the chat box by clicking the arrow next to where it says chat. You can always open it again with the same arrow if you choose. We'll be providing live captioning during this webinar. Below the chat box, there is a media viewer box. This will contain the captions. If you do not want to see the captions, click on the down-facing arrow next to the word Media Viewer, the same way you might if you want to hide the chat box. Time permitting, Leslie Lieberman and I will be moderating the Q&A towards the end of this webinar, and so please feel free to submit any questions that you might have throughout the webinar. At the very end of the webinar, you'll be taken to a brief survey. Please take a moment to let us know what was useful and what could have been better. If you get disconnected at any point, return to the email you received with the original webinar link and re-enter the training. Sometimes the sound cuts out due to internet connection, so feel free to call back in if that's a problem for you. If you're experiencing technical difficulties and are unable to contact Angelica Medina, you may call WebEx Tech Support to resolve any issues. That phone, which I'll post in the chat box, is 1-866-229-3239. Again, thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar is on intergenerational family support through child-parent psychotherapy. The webinar will highlight child-parent psychotherapy, a trauma-specific evidence-based intergenerational intervention for children birth through age 5. The presenters will use case scenarios from their work in Philadelphia with women who are in treatment for substance use and who are pregnant or parenting a young child. Today's speakers are Una Majmudar and Kathy Antaki. Our host for today is Leslie Lieberman. The National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health, is pleased to be co-sponsoring this webinar. And we are funded through the U.S. Department on Health and Human Resources, and we are a special issue resource center on domestic violence, trauma, mental health, and substance use, funded by the Family Violence Prevention Services Administration. And we seek to promote what we refer to as an ACRTI approach, which stands for Accessible, Culturally Responsive, and Trauma-Informed Approach for the DV field, and then a domestic violence sensitive and trauma-informed approach for the behavioral health field, child welfare, and legal providers. We provide an extensive array of resources and training and technical assistance, as well as research, policy development, and public awareness activities. So we invite you to look at our website when you have time. I am now delighted to turn it over to our host and facilitator, Leslie Lieberman, who will be facilitating today, and will tell you a little bit about CTIPP, our co-hosting organization. Leslie?
Thank you so much, Susan, and good afternoon, everyone. It is just so exciting to see that we have over 260 people on this call on this important topic from all over the country, and seeing some names of old friends and lots of new friends. So as Susan said, this is Leslie Lieberman, and I'm the Senior Director of Training and Organizational Development at the Health Federation of Philadelphia, and I'm also a board member of the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice, or CTIPP for short. You can see our slide up now with our website, which I encourage you to look at sometime after today's webinar. I'm really delighted that CTIPP is able to partner with the National Council on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health to bring you today's webinar as part of their series on trauma, opioids, and domestic violence. Before I introduce my two colleagues, I'd like to say a few words about CTIPP. We are a relatively new nonprofit organization whose mission is to create a resilient, trauma-informed society where all individuals and families have the opportunity and the supports necessary to thrive. Our goal is to advocate for public policies and programs at the federal, state, local, and tribal levels that incorporate up-to-date scientific findings regarding the relationship between trauma across the lifespan and many social and health problems. In addition, we work in collaboration with communities, cities, states, and tribes to develop trauma-informed and prevention-focused policies and practices that reflect experience in the field. And you can join CTIPP. We welcome your participation. Now it is my distinct honor to introduce two of my Health Federation colleagues, Una Majmudar and Kathy Antaki. Both of them have dedicated their careers to serving families with young children and assisting them in breaking the cycle of intergenerational trauma transmission. On a personal note, Kathy and Una are a pleasure to work with. I am awed by their ability to advocate for the families they serve and to always keep both children and parents in mind as they work. They continuously teach me about what it truly means to provide trauma-informed care. Una is the clinical manager for the Young Child and Parent Program at the Health Federation of Philadelphia. She is a licensed clinical social worker and recently obtained her Clinical Mentor Infant Mental Health endorsement. Una has been working with children and families for more than 20 years in a variety of settings, including residential, outpatient, and home visiting. She received her master's in social work from New York University and her bachelor's degree from Lafayette College. Una also completed a postmaster's clinical social work fellowship at the University of New Mexico. For the past 16 years, Una's professional focus has been on supporting families with children birth to 5. She is a founding board member and vice president-elect for the Pennsylvania Association for Infant Mental Health and is also a trained infant massage instructor. And in her free time, which it's hard to believe she has any, she loves spending time outside, being active, traveling with her husband and 9-year-old son, and spending time with close friends. Kathy Antaki is the lead clinical child-parent specialist for the Young Child and Parent Project at the Health Federation of Philadelphia. Kathy has over 20 years of experience serving the needs of young children and their families in a variety of settings. Kathy holds a master's degree in social service, a license in social work, a master's of education in early intervention, and a bachelor's degree in early childhood education. She has worked in the field of social work, early intervention, education, and research, focusing on the needs and development of children ages birth to 5 and their families. She has held positions directing programs, conducting research, as well as providing direct services to families in the classroom and in their homes. She has also taught classes in the Early Intervention Graduate Program at Wheelock College in Boston. Kathy and Una are both rostered child-parent psychotherapists, the only evidence-based trauma-informed dyadic intervention for very young children. They will discuss CTIPP and how they have applied it in their work with parents and with substance use disorders. Thank you, Una and Kathy.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you, Leslie, and everyone. Thanks for that introduction. So we are really excited to be with you all today to share with you our work here in Philadelphia. So Kathy and I are together, and we're going to be going back and forth as we talk through the slides today. So like Leslie said, we are from the Health Federation of Philadelphia, and here is the Health Federation of Philadelphia's mission. The mission is to improve access to and quality of health and human services for underserved and vulnerable populations. And I've had the pleasure of working for them for about 16 years now. So we, before we begin, we would like to thank the families who have taught us so much and have graciously allowed us to share their stories. And that being said, we would appreciate if you do not take any pictures or documentation of the client stories that we will share, just to protect their confidentiality. We also would like to thank our trainers from the Mount Hope Family Center, Jody Manley and Elisa Hathaway. We saw Jody was joining us today, so hi, Jody. And also our colleagues in Boston who have taught us a lot about this work, the intersection of CTIPP and parents with substance use disorders, Ruth Paris and Amy Summer. And of course, Alicia Lieberman, who is the one who started CTIPP altogether, and she has been so supportive in our going work and development. So we're going to talk to you today about our work with the Young Child and Parent Program. And currently in Philadelphia, we are partnering with 4 substance use treatment programs providing child-parent psychotherapy. 3 of them are in Philadelphia, and 1 of them is in our neighboring county, Bucks County. And we are working specifically with women who are either pregnant in their 3rd trimester or have children under the age of 6, and the parents are in treatment at one of those locations. We started our work back in 2012 through a regional partnership grant providing CTIPP to families and young children impacted by substance use disorders and involved with child welfare. And through many lessons learned, we have arrived at the intersection of providing our services on-site embedded in the treatment programs.
Hi, this is Kathy, and as Una said, we are going to be going back and forth, but it's a real pleasure to be with all of you. We are going to just give you a very brief understanding of child-parent psychotherapy, which is the intervention that we are currently using to serve these children and families. Many of you may already be familiar with CTIPP, and so it's not to give great detail, but just so that we have a context to share our work with you in. So CTIPP is an evidence-based trauma intervention for children birth to 5 who have experienced trauma. And the focus of this intervention is on the parent-child relationship. It explores how caregivers Trauma can impact that dyadic relationship, and it can affect the child's developmental trajectory. It seeks to restore and protect child's well-being and mental health. So the conceptual premise for CTIPP is clearly the attachment system. There are several underlying principles. The first is most critical, is the attachment system. And we know that young children heal best in the context of a relationship with a safe primary caregiver, which is usually the parent. So helping children address emotional or behavioral issues needs to take place within that primary relationship. But additionally, the cultural and socioeconomic factors of the family have to be core elements to consider in formulating the work. In line with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, attending to the challenges of daily living is critically important, both in helping to stabilize a family as well as to forge a supportive and therapeutic relationship between the therapist and the parent. In other words, this work does not take place in a protected bubble, but the therapist has to meet the family exactly where they are, both emotionally as well as physically. The families we're working with often present with multiple levels of challenges. Another important element or premise of CTIPP is that the relationship of the therapist to the dyad is key to the intervention. The clinician has to convey hope as she helps the family to understand all that has happened. So these two concentric circles actually give a great description of the core of CTIPP, which is that the relationship is the core client here. The focus of the intervention is to use the power of the relationship between the parent and the child to heal each individual, as well as to heal the disruptions that may have occurred. Remember that the attachment system is the main organizer of a child's response to danger and lack of safety. So the space in the overlapping circles represents this attachment system, and this is where the therapist meets the dyad.
So this picture describes some of the premises of providing child-parent psychotherapy, and we refer to them in CTIPP as the lenses. So we are always thinking through these lenses when we're with a dyad, when we're with a parent and a child, and oftentimes there may be other caregivers who are either in the room or maybe not in the room but very present. So like Kathy said, attachment is core to our work. Understanding the family's trauma background of the parent and the child is very core. Safety in all ways is very critical in terms of what we're doing. And of course, thinking about the developmental stages of the child and how do we appropriately support that through our work with the parents. And the overlay of understanding that none of this work can happen unless we are paying attention to the culture in which this family is living and experiencing their life, and that we meet them right there. So that is really critical. So this brings us to where we brought our work most recently. We had always started our work with families impacted by substance use disorders. But most recently, we wanted to bring our work closer to the treatment programs and really have this other lens embedded in the work that we do. So we are bringing all these different lenses to the treatment programs and sharing those lenses with everybody there. And we are then also receiving the work that the family is going through, through the lens of the substance use treatment. So that's where these two intersect. And you'll hear in a little while how we've been integrating our work within various types of programs, from outpatient to IOP to some family-centered residential programs. And there's a lot of work happening around the country, specifically the folks we mentioned in Boston have been doing this work for quite some time, and we have learned a lot from them, and our work is really grounded in a lot of the work they have done as we have begun to bring this to Philadelphia.
So just some logistics. Our service usually is 9 to 12 months, which is a long time, but critically important, particularly for the age of the young child. Our sessions are usually an hour long, master or doctoral clinicians, and where it takes place really varies. Currently, as Una mentioned, we are in 4 different treatment programs, 2 of which are residential. So in the residential programs, we are obviously located on site until the parent is discharged. For outpatient, we may be seeing a family at the program, in their home, or another community setting. When a client leaves the residential program, we basically go with them. It's the flexibility of where we provide the service that's actually very core to what we're doing, because we continually want our families to know that we are meeting them exactly where they are. Sorry. So sorry.
So just to recap a little bit, the goal of CPP really is to support and enhance or repair the infant, young child parent relationships that have been impacted by trauma in some way. And CPP is truly a 2-generation model of intervention. And you know, there's a lot of ways that we really think about this generational impact of trauma and abuse and substance use. You know, we oftentimes will use a genogram with the parents to help them see visually, you know, where was the trauma and the substance use in their family. And it is pretty incredible to sit with a mom who can look generations, you know, into her parents and grandparents and really see where the substance use was and kind of have her look forward in terms of what does she want the genogram to look like, you know, for her child, and increasing her awareness of what the impact of that is and thinking about her own experiences as a child. You know, as I was chatting with Kathy, one of the things that I was reflecting on is that, you know, we've been in this place to talk about an epidemic before in terms of the crack epidemic, and I feel like many of my families that I work with now, the moms that I'm working with, when they're talking about their parents' drug use or their grandparents' drug use, they're talking about, at least in Philadelphia, many of them, crack cocaine, and I feel that many of the younger moms that I have, they are the children of the crack epidemic, and so really seeing that intergenerational pattern. And another one I think that we have noted is the intergenerational notion of foster care, that many of the families that we have, if the children that we are working with are in foster care, many of the parents that we're working with have been in foster care themselves. And that was at a time when there was really no timeline. So many of the parents were in foster care for years and had multiple transitions in caregivers. And many of them are now reconnected to the parents who they were originally separated from. So paying attention to the generations that are part of this work is so crucial.
So we're just going to take a moment here just to think about what a healthy parent-infant interaction might look like. Even in the midst of our work, in which the attachment between a parent and her child may have been severely ruptured, there are often moments of connection. And so in our work, we are constantly being alert to and focusing on capturing these moments with a parent, even though they may be fleeting. And bringing a parent's attention to these moments is often an important port of entry. So this is little Willa and her mom, and Willa is 2 weeks old in this picture. And if you look at her gaze toward her mom, makes you wonder, what is she feeling? How might her mom be feeling? And what do you think she might be saying? Perhaps something like, "You're everything to me, Mom." Her gaze, her direct eye contact is a bid for Mom's response, and Mom's smile, direct eye contact tells Willa, "I hear you, I see you, and I'm listening." Jack Shonkoff from the Center for the Developing Child has provided us with a wonderful metaphor which captures this, which he describes as serve and return. So like a tennis ball, Willa lobs a relationship ball to Mom, and Mom makes contact with the ball and lobs it back. We now know these types of interactions can build brain architecture. And babies are born waiting and expecting this to happen. Those of us who work with these dyads have the opportunity to support parents in building their capacity for serve and return. And most parents are in awe of their newborn's capacity to not only engage in these interactions, but to initiate them as well.
So the next thing we want to consider is, given that really nice picture of Willa and the description of a very secure, what we would think is secure, beautiful interaction with a parent and a young child, you know, we all know that there are many things that might interfere with that. Not all the time, but certainly there are things that could interfere and interfere with the parent's capacity to engage in those serve and return interactions, which as a result will impact the relationship, and if that's chronic, can impact the child's developmental trajectory. So these are probably things that are not new to anyone who's listening, but these are certainly things that we have to consider when we're working with our families. You know, Kathy referenced Maslow's hierarchy, and certainly without food or housing or knowing where you're going to spend the night, if you are constantly under threat of potential violence in the home or in the community, your mental health challenges, certainly the trauma histories are very significant with the families we work with. Those are all things that may impact that child-parent relationship. You know, infants may be separated, or young children could be separated through a NICU experience, and just separation in general. So having worked with a lot of dyads where the child is in foster care, that separation is not only traumatic for the child, but it is also very traumatic for the parent as they are trying to focus on their recovery, being separated from their child and not having much control over that. So we're really focusing today on the impact of the parental substance use on this dyad, knowing that, you know, many times or almost always there are several other things that are impacting the family along with the parental substance use. It's never just in isolation. So this slide, there's a lot of information on here, and full disclosure, Kathy and I are not scientists, but this is really the core of information, which is, I think, leading some of the work to bring the attachment interventions together with the substance use treatment interventions for young children. You know, so what this slide is really showing us is that the pleasure and reward system in the brain, in essence, is co-opted by the use of substances. And so previously rewarding patterns in relationships or parenting, things that were normally rewarding are no longer as gratifying for somebody. Because that system in the brain has been co-opted. So more specifically, the pleasures involved with parenting, right? You think about taking care of little Willa and the close physical contact and enjoying her growth and development and her smiles and feeling connected. That may not feel as gratifying anymore for a parent whose brain is now somewhat altered due to their addiction. And, what that says to us is that, it's not just a behavioral reaction that a parent is not able to tend to their child's needs, right? We have heard often, why is the parent doing that? Why can't they just stop? There's this, sort of making the parent out to be a villain because of what they've done. And we'll get to that later about managing those feelings, but really thinking about, these parents do love their children, and we are dealing with the intersection of some significant brain changes due to their addiction, and it's the same core center in the brain where we find that pleasure and reward when it comes to parenting. So that is where we find ourselves doing our work, and also currently learning a lot from our colleagues. So after our first round of doing this work, we really started to think about, how can we merge this? It really feels like we need to bring our work, our CPP work, our attachment-based intervention closer to the treatment. And, we did indeed find some folks who were doing that. And this is where we started wondering, how can we do this? And that is where we are now. We are now embedded in programs, in treatment programs, and we are starting to provide the CPP. And so just before we share some of the cases with you, I just wanted to note that, there was a previous webinar in this series. I know that Sandy Bloom was one of the speakers, and they talked about the social determinants of the opioid epidemic and sort of the trajectory, and the child-parent relationship was right there and indicated as, a point in the trajectory that is influenced through this epidemic. And so we are really, I think, excited to be able to focus in that area right now. So we are going to share a couple of cases with you. And I'm going to go ahead first. This is Una, and I'm going to begin talking with you about a mom who I met when her baby was 2 weeks old. And this mom, when I met her, was 24 years old and single, Caucasian. She had been addicted to heroin during her pregnancy and found out late in her pregnancy that she was pregnant. So she didn't know she was pregnant until almost the end. She started MAT treatment, got into prenatal care, and shortly thereafter gave birth to her baby in the hospital. And the baby was not diagnosed with NAS. That's a whole nother presentation for another day. The baby stayed 1 day in the NICU, and Child Protective Services was called, and there was an arrangement made where mom was allowed to go to a mother-baby residential drug treatment program, and the baby followed her the next day. So there was only a one day separation. So just for a little bit of history, this was mom's second child. She also had another daughter for whom she voluntarily terminated her rights as a parent when she was about to be incarcerated at some point. And you will see a little bit later how that loss, has been a significant factor in our work together too. So a little bit more about mom's history. For most of you, I'm sure you're aware of the adverse childhood experiences, and mom has a score of 8. So I think generally people have a sense of what that means in terms of her history. And she describes the first 3 months of her life as often being cared for by family members and not by her biological parents. They were not always around. They were involved with drugs themselves, and when she was 3 months old, they died tragically. And family was unable to step in at that point and care for her, and so she went into foster care where she resided until she was school age, I think around age 10 or 11, so quite some time. And she describes a pretty horrific experience of abuse during her tenure in foster care. So luckily, that was found out, and she was then reunited with a family member and was eventually adopted by a family member.
Oh, what's happening here?
There we go. Okay.
Why has it got so big?
So an important thing to know is that Mom reports that she was told about the adoption and told about her parents when she was 16. And that coincides with when she, through involvement with a boyfriend, started selling painkillers, using, and then she also, at that point in time, tried heroin for the first time. At some point, she was in a car accident, was prescribed pain medication. She also describes that as a significant point when her opioid use disorder really kicked in and her addiction to heroin became very significant. She also had a lot of run-ins with the law and was involved in a lot of criminal activity of various kinds, and found herself incarcerated on 2 occasions for pretty extended periods of time. And you can see the ages of that fairly young. We know from development that, this is still pretty much a teenage brain that we are dealing with. And during one of those times, she describes being in solitary confinement for a significant part of the time that she was incarcerated. I don't know all of the details, but there were some significant things that happened while she was incarcerated that led to her being in solitary confinement. And she will very clearly state that she has PTSD from that experience. Okay. So like I said, Mom and baby were referred, and this is a case where we're really happy to hear that, the mom and baby were referred right from the hospital into a residential drug treatment program. So other than the 1-day delay, this was not a dyad that had to be separated. So I was able to begin my work when the baby was 2 weeks old. Baby is now 5 months, going on 6 months, and as of right now, she's completed the residential program, and I'll be following up with her at her outpatient program. So thinking about the work that I did, some of the sessions with Mom were really challenging. I think it was difficult sometimes for her to tolerate the intense focus on her son. I had to take it really slowly in terms of whether or not she was okay sharing some of her past details. She was fairly forthcoming. At one point, I did hear that there was some thought that maybe she was over-medicating with methadone, and I could sort of see that presentation with her. Oftentimes she would kind of let me know she was done and she would need to go, and then some days she was able to tolerate the session a lot more. I think it definitely took some time to build that relationship with her, and really doing that through, just maintaining a very empathic stance with her, a lot of listening, and a lot of what Kathy described as the serve and return interactions with this little baby. Taking every opportunity I could to help her see and acknowledge those moments. What is the bid that her child is offering to her, and how is she responding back? And look at what he is doing, and look at his eyes. And I used some infant massage to help her really connect with her baby, and, really just taking that full time to what we call in CPP, really having a reflective stance and holding the dyad in mind, and with hopes that I could hold her and her stories and and her. You know, she would come often very dysregulated and just sort of feel like I could be a container for her and help her see how she is that exact container for her baby, offering a lot of developmental guidance along the way to her. For this mom, you know, there was really no template for caregiving. You know, there was, you know, she absolutely loves this baby and wants to do the best she can, but she was very challenged to, and has been challenged to really understand what it is that he really needs. Her ADLs are a challenge in terms of day-to-day, you know, caring for herself and hygiene and things like that, dealing with like the stroller being really dirty and just taking care of herself. And so a lot of times the program is very focused on that, and I'm giving a lot of feedback about how she's really doing a lot of work to focus on her relationship with her baby. So we did a lot of affect regulation, co-regulating. Sometimes she would be engaged in something at the site and she would be really riled up. I can recall a time when I sat with her and just did a lot of co-regulation with her and her baby, got down to sort of the same eye level as her, really speaking for the baby, and really thinking about those building blocks of building some reflective function and capacity for this mom. You know, what is it? I wonder what it's like for him when you know, when mommy is so upset. Mommy, I really need you to, and really speaking for the baby. So I've said some of this already in terms of some of the things that I have done. I think for this dyad, you know, when we're doing CPP with a little baby, you know, the mother's or the parents' own story is very much a part of what's in the room, and we are often talking about the past as well as the present. And, you know, we spent a lot of time going back and forth to the time when she had to give up her rights for her daughter and really sitting with that loss, that very significant loss, and wondering what that child might be doing. She did a lot of wondering about how that child might be doing, and then bringing her to the present in terms of she is now here with this baby and she's doing a really good job. So one of the benefits of being embedded in the treatment programs is that we have the ability to collaborate on a fairly significant level. So I am not just there for the 1 hour of the session, but I spend some time there. I can spend time connecting in the child care room. I've spent time with mom in the child care room. The daycare provider is an older woman who has really mentored this mom. So for me to connect with that caregiver was really important. And being at the clinical treatment team and offering those different lenses that we offer, and being able to sit with her therapist and really, you know, share our different perspectives of how things are going has been really, really helpful. Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. We're just going to switch up here for a minute. So the last comment I want to make about this case, which was a really interesting experience for me, is there was one particular session not so long ago when we were sitting together. She's with her baby, holding him right in front of her, and she says to me, you know, Una, I really can't imagine ever taking another drug because he's my drug. And I thought, wow, she really just said it all right there. So I spent some time talking to her about what that feels like. You know, tell me what you mean by that. And I connected for her that feeling that she has, that she's describing, you know, that was, in essence, the same kind of high that she was seeking from the drugs. And this is what we're after. This is what this work is all about. It's helping you to connect to these feelings being a mom to this little baby. So that was a really powerful moment. So just for where we are now, I am in the process of connecting with her outpatient provider to continue our work in the community. So Kathy is going to go ahead and talk about her case.
So we're going to shift quite a bit to a dyad in which the child is quite a bit older. And so I think that this will present a very different experience of CPP, and yet very much in line with the intervention. I came to know this parent in my work at the residential treatment program. And in this location, there are several different options for living. So at the time I met Mom, she was not living in the family house, as it's called. She was in the halfway house because she did not have her child with her. So Mom is 25 years old, Caucasian. She has a history of substance use starting when she was 15, and she shared that she began using with her mother. Her mother introduced her to substances, and they would spend time together in that way. Heroin, opioids, and methamphetamine were her drugs of choice. She also shared that while living with her mom, she witnessed years of domestic violence. Her stepfather was quite violent, and in fact, she suffered physical abuse by him as well. She doesn't remember exactly all that happened, but she does know she was hospitalized for 5 days as a result of his violent actions. So she was sent to live with her grandmother. She had two younger siblings, but the grandmother could only take her because she couldn't care for the younger ones. So she went to live with Grandma for a while. She talks about chronic depression, and she pretty much used from the time she was 15 pretty consistently. And then to support her addiction, she was prostituting. So her first child and only child was born when she was 21. But because Mom was seriously using at this point, she was incarcerated off and on for short periods of time, but most recently in the last 6 months prior to coming to the treatment program. And she has been clean for about 6 months. She said that she completed up to the 10th grade. For a while, she went to live with her mom in Georgia as a teen. Her mom took her with her, attempting to start her new life, left the abusive relationship, but then she said that really quickly fell apart. So when she came home, she basically only recalls that much of her life pretty much revolved around survival, her substance use, and supporting her addiction. So when she was released from prison, she was actually sent to, her option was to go to a residential treatment program, and that's where I met her. The interesting thing is that when she arrived at the treatment program, everyone realized that she herself had been the child of a client in that program at the same age that her child is now. And interesting that the staff at this treatment program, they're long-standing. They've been there for years and years. And so she felt like it was coming home. There were people there that remembered her, could tell her stories about her as a child. So in her case, it was a very positive connection and a positive emotional experience. The child is a 4-year-old female with no intrauterine exposure. Mom explained that when she found out she was pregnant, she stopped using right away. She never used, never went on maintenance. She just didn't use. The child pretty much lived with Mom and the maternal grandmom, alternately with Dad, but it sounded like a pretty unstable housing for the child. When Mom was using, she would go over to the Dad's. Dad, however, lived with his very elderly parents. And so the child was ultimately placed in the custody of the paternal grandparents, who were in their 80s, when Mom was sent to prison. When Mom was released, the child would come and visit her on weekends, but did not live with her. But during the visits, she began to increasingly report a level of violence going on in the home. Dad would reportedly drink heavily and then go on violent rampages. The child reports were confirmed by her 21-year-old stepsister, who also lived in the home. He's reported to have broken the grandmother's hip, put his fist through the wall, and would routinely lock the child in her room. So based on these allegations and investigation by CYS, sole custody was awarded to Mom, and the child moved into the residential treatment program. An order of protection from abuse was ordered as well. So at this point, the referral was made for CPP, and this case presented as a very dynamic and very quickly changing situation. So as the child began to share this information with Mom, it became clear that a shift in our assessment and engagement phase might be helpful. Typically, we spend several weeks meeting with a parent individually, doing lots of extensive history gathering, assessments. But in this case, Mom was quite anxious about what this child had been experiencing, and so the decision was made to do it as a parallel process. So in addition to meeting weekly with just Mom to do this assessment stage, we started that dyadic work right away. So during this time, the support was provided for Mom to navigate the legal steps necessary to ensure that her child could remain with her and not return to the unsafe environment. So collaboration with CYS as well as the child advocate attorneys took place. So right from the beginning, Mom began to actively take on a role of protector for her child. So the primary goals of the work were first to support Mom in her efforts to establish herself as the safe parent, and to support Mom in assuming her role in helping her child process all that she had been through. Mom was highly committed not only to providing physical and emotional safety, she was also highly focused on, as she would often say, finally being the parent I never could because I was always committed to getting high. So similar to what Una reported about her client, very quickly Mom saw this as the opportunity was presenting herself. And she was starting from the beginning. This child had very little contact. Mom was away for 6 months and never saw her child, never spoke to her. And yet she was rescuing this child from a very violent situation. So as unfortunate as this was, this crisis of safety, offered Mom an immediate opportunity to embrace her role as a parent in a way she had never been able to do before. The multi-generational aspects of substance use and adversity were so clear in this case. Mom was able to reflect on the reality that not only is she attending to the physical safety needs of her child, she is constantly focused on the emotional states of her daughter as they navigate through this building of relationship and repair. She's able to talk about not only that there was no one there to keep her physically safe as a child. She cannot identify a single experience in her life in which a parent or caregiver ever considered how she may be feeling. And yet this was the work that she was very anxiously wanting to engage in. It's been really extraordinary to watch Mom be able to take this in, to see her agency as a parent emerge. And Mom has a strong capacity for reflective functioning. She's been able to fully engage in this work. So these experiences are also impacting her recovery work. Embedded in the treatment program, I have daily contact with her individual therapists, those that run the therapy groups, and they all report that since her child has arrived, she has become highly activated in her recovery work. The primary goals of the work for the child was to support her in understanding the then and the now as she processed the intense violence. And she, too, has been really open to sharing her inner world with Mom and I. Over and over again in her play, you can see she demonstrates all that she has witnessed. Using the playhouse, Mom noticed that she can share many details of what had been occurring. There was one scene in which we were using people, and very quickly she would take all the people out and identify each member of her family. And there was one day where she played out an entire scene in which she was the person responsible for keeping everybody safe and away from Dad. And everybody was sleeping, and she kept moving them around as he moved through the house. It was her job to move them all around out of harm's way. And she replays scenes from her home all the time. And Mom was very astute to recognize that she is very articulate in talking about elements of what happened, but she is very not able yet to talk about how it made her feel. And so we've actually made that as part of the work. So the ongoing goals of the work is really to help Mom explore her own background, her own history, and how it impacts her now, and as she is embracing this role as her parent. This has been a very painful, even though Mom is very astute and very present and very engaged, this has been a very painful process for her because she has actually put her role as a parent in a different place. And with the presence of her child, I mean, the child is right in front of her every day and playing out things that she has experienced. So it's been a very painful process for Mom. And so a lot of the work has been around supporting Mom, basically to do caretaking of Mom. Mom is willing to do this hard work, and so part of my role is to be a caretaker for her, to check in with her often, and just to be sure that she is being kind enough to herself, basically. So within the treatment program, the model that we are now embarking on has opened up so many opportunities. It allows consistent, ongoing contact with the dyad outside of the session. So, for example, it's not just that 1 hour a week. Many informal interactions are taking place during the day. So there are light moments when I can go into the dining room and sit with them at lunch and chat about fun things. But there are more intense moments when I come upon the mom helping her child deal with separation issues as she boards the bus to Head Start. There are chances to scaffold Mom in her new role as the primary caregiver. Observations can be made and then shared, like, I saw how calm and gentle you were able to be as you soothed her fears and saying goodbye. And I also saw how sad you were watching her cry and how it made you feel. I can comment on the language I hear Mom using with her daughter, emotional language, which we have jointly identified as a goal for her. Working as part of the larger treatment team, attending the clinical meetings, in which each of the counselors for this mom meet weekly, helps to create a more holistic approach. Bringing the child and parent perspective has impacted their work as well. No longer is Mom seen just as an adult client. It is clear that she is a mom. And working with her trauma counselor has broadened their work as the multi-generational aspects have been highlighted. This has been one of the most positive aspects. In a short time, the child has come to know that this is our room. And so there are lots of informal opportunities for the child. She'll stop by. She calls it her room. And she'll stop by just to fill me in about something that may have happened at school at Head Start. And having the proximity where a child feels that the space, the physical space, is part of their space has helped enormously.
Thank you, Kathy. So that was a lot of information and a lot of details about two of the cases that we've been working with here. And it's, I think, a good point just to sort of interject sort of how it is necessary for us as clinicians to take time to step back and also reflect on our work. And Kathy and I find ourselves doing a lot of kind of peer reflective supervision around our work and thinking about what it was like that day when you saw the parent and the child. A lot of elements of my case have been very challenging, and I've been able to sit with Kathy and process and talk and reflect, so just gaining perspective, and that's a huge element of this work as well. Just I'm noticing now, having sort of told my case and hearing Kathy's case, it just really enforces how, how intense, emotionally intense the work can be when we are truly noticing our own reactions and really being present for the dyad. And something that Kathy and I both were talking about is the capacity for parental reflective functioning, and that is a significant element in CPP work is to really enhance the mother's capacity to be reflective and for us to be reflective. So we just wanted to take a moment and really define what that is. And basically, you know, to have parental reflective functioning of capacity is to basically be able to see your child as a separate, autonomous individual with a mind of his or her own. So the ability of a parent to not just respond to behaviors, but to really think about those underlying motivations of the behavior and respond to that. So maintaining that empathic stance towards your child. Much of this work has been described by Peter Fonagy, and in his words, right, uniquely human capacity to make sense of each other and to imagine the mental states in self and others. And what we do know is that the capacity to have reflective functioning as a parent is really essential in the development of the infant-young child-parent relationship. And a lot of that goes back to what we started out with, was thinking about that serve and return interaction between a child and a parent. So we are going to be continuing our work in Philadelphia, and we were very lucky to receive another regional partnership grant recently. So we will be able to increase our capacity a little bit, and we'll be building on our lessons learned from our previous grant. And one of the new interventions that we will be integrating in this time is mothering from the inside out, which has been talked about more recently in the early childhood field. It's a specific evidence-based intervention for mothers dealing with drug addiction who have young children, and it is very specifically targeted to increasing their capacity for reflective functioning. So we will be training on that soon and merging the MIO with the beginning phase of CPP, working really closely with our trainers in both models and bringing that to the treatment programs where we are in Philadelphia. So, you know, one of the most important things about doing this work is to acknowledge how difficult and challenging it can be to work with this population, and to acknowledge that, you know, all of us doing this work can be really easily triggered when we're talking about infants, young children, you know, impacted by parents who have you know, use substances, maybe expose their children in utero, and it can make it challenging to really hold that dyad in mind and to think about their needs and to maintain that empathic stance. And that's where a lot of the peer support comes in, and, you know, acknowledging that, you know, today it still often feels like a moral versus public health issue. And I think we definitely see it as a public health issue, but those are some of the difficult conversations that we have with folks when people are operating out of a it's a moral failing of the parent. And so we need to be really mindful of our own values and beliefs and really think about how do our own values and beliefs impact the decisions that we're making. So that brings us to the end of our information today. I think we have some time for questions, and we'll make some of these slides available to folks, so you'll have our contact information as well. And we thank you very much for listening and joining us today.
Hi, everyone. This is Susan, and Leslie and I are going to try to field your questions. I've been looking at what's been in the chat box, and I can answer one of the questions from Julie, which says, what does MIO stand for, which is mothering from the inside out. Leslie, I don't know if there's anything you would like to take at this point, or.
Sure. First of all, thank you, Una and Kathy, for a really wonderful presentation. And there is one question in the chat box that I am seeing, and then I had a couple of questions that I can follow up with. But feel free to continue to pose questions either in the chat or the Q&A box. So this question is about whether or not, sorry, I had it, now it's
Was it the one on how a peer specialist is included in the treatment model? Did Elaine? Yes.
Yes, thank you. Now I'm seeing it. Okay. Yes, and there are more questions. I see they're coming up now. Whether peer specialists are incorporated into the models that you're working on, Kathy and Una, or or how they're incorporated in the work that you're doing. I assume that's meaning peer recovery specialists.
Yep. Sure, I can speak to that. So directly in the CPP work that we do, we don't have a peer recovery specialist as part of our particular treatment team. However, a number of the programs that we work in do have peer recovery specialists in their programming, and that varies program to program, but we have definitely found that the peer support that parents get is essential and is paramount to their success. So it's a really important part. So not directly with our CPP work, but part of the larger extension of our collaborative work.
And there is another question, this is Susan, that just came in that maybe you can speak to. Zachariah was asking, how can I utilize some of this information in a domestic abuse shelter, domestic violence shelter? The work that you talked to us about that was so compelling is part of a residential treatment setting. So maybe you can speak to that if you'd like.
Is the domestic violence shelter or program a family shelter?
Well, most domestic violence shelters include the victimized parent and children. Sometimes, and their children. Mm-hmm.
I think, if you think about CPP actually began in response to the need to help children heal from, being a witness to domestic violence. So CPP, in and of itself, is a very usable intervention for that population, for sure. And I think that in terms of looking at multi-generations, we're looking at it in terms of substance use, but when you think about violence, there is intergenerational violence often in families. And so, as in the case with my case, I really feel like working with the child is actually helping the mom heal as well. And I think it's very similar. And I think there are other guests out there who are in the CTIPP world, then feel free to jump in. But it certainly is a good match, I believe, to that population.
So just to add to that, like Kathy said, I mean, CPP was originally developed for that particular population, and it's newer that we're trying to integrate it into the substance use world to help dyads. So I think one of the things to consider probably in a domestic violence shelter is, you know, the readiness of a mom and child to address, you know, some of the traumatic experiences that they may have experienced, but it seems like a very prime venue to think about this work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's challenging from our perspective as a national center that looks at some of these intersectional issues when a parent is using drugs or alcohol and is in a sheltered group living setting and is really in crisis. And so I think there are lots of components that would make it very difficult to do, but on the other hand, I think some of the principles that you brought out in terms of observations and really catching those moments when things are going well could be very, very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely, and it certainly is not without its challenges. However, you know, Una and I were just talking earlier today of, you know, the reality that it's not a linear process. You know, you don't have a start and a stop at the end. And there are many times it's very circular. But I do think that one of the most powerful tools in this model is the therapist remains this constant. The therapist doesn't go anywhere if a mom relapses. And I think that's the other sort of beauty of being embedded in a treatment program, particularly the residential program, because we don't go anywhere. We're still there. And it actually is a model for the parent with their child. But it certainly is not without its challenges, and it's not linear at all.
Thanks. So I think there's another question about integrating this kind of maybe more the concepts versus the exact model of CPP. And this question is from Mary about how to incorporate this work into the DV setting when you only have the opportunity to work with the parents. What pieces do you think from the CPP model can you use in working with parents when they're not with their children?
I think I would, you know, that makes me think about all work you can do with a parent to help keep their child in mind and really think about building that capacity for reflective functioning about their child. So, you know, no matter what their experiences are as a mom who has been through, you know, domestic abuse, intimate partner violence, other trauma, is the impact that not only has on her, but thinking about how that extends to her child, and always keeping the child in mind and validating that that woman is a mother. And even if the child is not with her, she can hold that child close and think about how that child is doing, and really, again, just holding that child in mind and building that capacity, I think can really be helpful. And sometimes we do that a lot before we even bring the child into the dyadic work. So, you know, emotional safety for the parents is really important. You know, if a mom is in the midst of her own traumatic experiences where she is unable to really regulate at all, and she is not in a position to sort of be what we would say an emotionally safe person in the moment to also hold her child's experiences. You know, stabilization, we use that word a lot, and taking care of the mom is so paramount. So doing that while also holding the child in mind.
Thank you. I did have a couple questions, and then there's still some questions in the chat box and the questions. But, you know, Kathy, you talked a lot about mothers, and I'm wondering about there was some discussion of fathers, but not being involved in the two cases you mentioned. But I'm wondering about, can fathers be involved in CPP? And then also, you mentioned, the difficulty of this work, and I'm wondering what you do to address the potential for secondary traumatic stress.
Well, I can take the first question about fathers. And absolutely, we did speak a lot about mothers. And I think all of the treatment programs that we are currently working in are for women, right? Yeah, so right at the moment, our focus is on moms. However, in the past, in our other 5 or 6 years of work, we had lots of dads in our project, and so it's very dad-friendly. It's parent. It's it's whoever is the primary parent for the child, and that may sometimes not even be the biological parent, whoever that person is to that child, but certainly fathers. Just right now we don't. We're working in gender-specific programs.
I will add to that, though, that, again, part of CPP is thinking about, all of those different caregivers and people who might be in that child's life or in the mother's life. And so even if that other parent is not physically able to be with us, oftentimes that parent may be very present in the room, sort of in thought. And, safety is a huge piece of it as well. We always have to think really carefully around, if it's a domestic violence situation, what are the safety concerns and how can we ensure that everybody who is going to engage in this work is safe and can maintain being safe. But I want to reiterate, in our last iteration of our grant, we worked with a lot of fathers who were trying to reunify with their children, and we saw and experienced a lot of dads who reunified, and that was really some really beautiful work that we were able to witness. And the second question about how do we take care of ourselves, yeah, it is. It's essential. I would be lying if I say that I do a perfect job of that all over the time, but you have to find your ways to have some clear boundaries in your life around work and home and pleasure, and you have to find ways to acknowledge that. In all of my efforts to help and support and bear witness to things, that I also deserve to bring happiness into my life. And so, for me, it's family and friends, and spending time with family and friends is very rejuvenating. And so for me, it's engaging socially with people who are very meaningful to me is something that fills me up. For other people, it's more solitary. So I think whatever it is that sort of fills your cup so that you can refuel. I'm lucky to work for an organization that is very, very supportive of taking care of ourselves and really, supports and understands the notion of vicarious trauma. So, that's another way. And supervision, being a supervisor for this program, the idea of making time for supervision is really important. If you are not able to sit with someone and talk about your work and talk about how it impacts you, you will burn out. And we certainly do engage with folks who, who feel very burned out, and it's sad to see that.
Yeah. This is Susan. I do have a question. You talked about your work lasting for about a year and the kind of intensive contact that you were able to bring to that, both therapeutic and then sort of in the moment. And I'm wondering if your program has thought at all about, once the treatment program has ended, what kinds of ongoing supports or other kinds of resources do you think parents might need then after having had this kind of amazing work that you're doing?
Well, I'll start the answer. So we, typically it's 9 to 12 months. And so for the folks in treatment, in particular the residential treatment, I think usually they're maximum 6 months. And so we have made a commitment to follow them into the community, which is a huge help because that transition time is very critical. And so we do, whenever possible, attempt to continue to staying and provide that service. The other piece of it is, and I think I alluded to it a little bit, is, we are clearly sort of cognizant of the fact that we cannot provide everything for a family, and so we work as collaboratively as humanly possible. We call everyone. So, for example, if we're working with a family and the parent is, in terms of employment, any resource that we can get people hooked into, because also it's a way of helping them understand, first of all, what they can access themselves. So we may not hook them up directly, but we may help them make the contact so that they have those, and also individual, we didn't even talk about that, but for a lot of our families, they're doing this very intense dyadic work, but they may have a lot of issues that really need to be sort of explored within an individual therapist. And, in the residential treatment program, everyone has an individual therapist as well, so that's a given. But in other programs, they don't. And I think that that's a very critical component. And it also helps a parent understand the difference. I tell parents all the time, I am not your individual therapist. But, you're in the room, and you're vitally important. Your process is important. But not everything about your story is going to be relevant to your child. And so I really do help parents, whenever possible, get connected to a really good therapist individually. So those are the kinds of ways. I think that we're very mindful of the fact that it's an important part of our work to make sure that we're addressing all the needs, but we're not the person necessarily addressing, really meeting all those needs, really connecting people.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I think it is hard and challenging when we do have the opportunity to work with a parent for a significant amount of time and we've seen their child grow and then it is time to end. And the ending and the goodbye is as important as the work that we did together. In how we say goodbye and how we end, and just some specific sort of discharge plans. Here at the Health Federation, we also have an early Head Start program, and so many of the families that I work with fall into the service area for early Head Start, and so I have been working to connect some of my families to the early Head Start program, especially if some of the families we have may have younger siblings. So I'm working with an older one, and then there's a younger one. So I think doing some of this work is setting the stage for parents to know that they can engage with a trusted professional, that relationships can be healing. But I definitely look for other sort of home visiting, supportive options in the community for them.
Thank you both. That's really helpful. I think it rounds out a lot of what you were saying. Yeah. Leslie, is there another question? We'll probably have time for one more.
Probably time for one more. This is a question about how does the LBGQ client fit into this model? Any changes that would be made to address this population who are parents of infants with SUD challenges, if you've had experience with that?
I don't see it making any difference. I mean, I think we, a parent is a parent. And if the parent has a partner, we would certainly engage that partner the way we would any of our DIAs that we work with. I don't know about you, but I don't think we've had anyone in our program. Have you?
Yeah, I've had a couple of that I've identified in that way, and I would agree. I mean, we're talking about a relationship that a child has with a, with a parent, a caregiver, and I don't see any particular adaptations or changes that would need to be made because really all in that parent-child relationship. So it may be helpful to know in terms of understanding if that parent has, it needs additional support, or if that parent has some particular, traumas or experiences in their life that are making things challenging for them. I think it would come under that, that the more we know, the more that we can be supportive of a parent's own needs, then that helps us sort of shape, they're an important part of the dyad. So, the more we know about a parent, the better we're able to support the dyad.
Excellent. And there was one informational inquiry, folks in the Jacksonville, Florida area wanting to know how they could get training in CPP. So would you refer them to the national CPP site, or?
Yes, I would do that. So actually, Child-Parent Psychotherapy has a really wonderful website right now where you can make inquiries, and there is a CPP Facebook page where you can connect as well. So there's lots of different ways to connect. Training is usually through a learning collaborative, so that there's a group of people getting trained at one time. But yes, the childparentpsychotherapy.org, I think.
.com. Jody already put it in for folks in the chat. It's there.
Perfect.
Yes.
That's a great resource. Wonderful resources there. So, and Chandra Goshipan, who is, she's is in charge really of the training and the dissemination of information, is the one who really coordinates all that.
Yes, thanks. And so with that, we have run out of time. I just wanted to really thank Una and Kathy for such a rich and wonderful presentation today that was inspiring, and to Leslie for facilitating today's webinar. And thank you to Angelica for making the webinar run so smoothly. And last but not least, we want to thank all of you for spending your time with the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health, and the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice. There was a question on this. Within the next week, we will send you a follow-up email with a link to the recording of today's webinar, in addition to the slides and handouts referenced, all of which will be available on our website. You're seeing now a slide that has some of our resources, or you were a moment ago. At the end, and you'll also receive a certificate of attendance for your time today. At the end of the webinar, you'll be taken to a very brief evaluation. If you could please take a moment to let us know what was useful and what could have been better, it will be greatly appreciated. And thanks again, and you see the information from CTIPP, and we hope you have a great day. Thanks for joining us. And there you see our contact information with our project administrator, Carla Alegria, and we hope to be here for you as a resource as well. Thank you so much, everybody.